So last week we were talking about enemies. How do you treat and handle an enemy? And this week I was thinking about it and thinking, handling an enemy is one thing, but how do you handle a mean person? And you might say the mean person might be the same as the enemy, and they might even overlap. But there's a lot of mean people that are not your enemy. And I was wondering, would you handle them the same way? And of course, the answer to how do you deal with an enemy is to love your enemy and do good to those who persecute you. Pray for those who persecute you. That was what we learned last week from Luke chapter 6. And that would apply also to someone who is being mean to you as well. It would work. But is there anything else? Is there anything different? And I found that there is. There is some things that we could do that would be a little bit different. Come to think of it, there's basically two responses that you can have to a mean person. There's a third response that would be a response that we can choose to have towards someone who is not being mean. But we'll get into that one in a little bit. The idea of someone being mean to us, though. Who is mean to us? Well, sometimes our husband or our wife can be mean to us, right? Yeah, or Justice. Or I'll bleep that out of the recording so he doesn't hear that. Sometimes our kids can be mean to us. Sometimes our friends. Sometimes those who are at work or school or play can be mean to us. And how do you deal with that? How do you react to someone who is being mean? In general, there are people who are intentionally mean. And there are those who are mean just because of things that have happened to them or things that are going on. And sometimes there are people who are mean that have a kind of almost a built-in spirit of meanness. It's just like it's part of their nature. They're where they're at in their life. So, how do you deal with that? I was looking in the Bible to see what kind of answers I could find about that. And one of the things that I found comes from Romans, and it's Romans chapter 12, if you'd like to follow along with me. In Romans chapter 12, starting with verse 14, it says, "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, and do not be conceited." I'd like to stop there for a minute, because this idea of who is mean, who is being mean to us. It says, "Blessed those who persecute, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn." So the first thing that I want to point out is that sometimes people are mean because of something that they're going through. Some hard time, something that has happened to them. You can see it in the movies and TV shows all the time because we get the backstory. You're watching it and you see everything that's happened to this point. And then all of a sudden this event happens and the person that they're talking to is like, wow, that was a mean person. But he didn't see everything that you saw. He just saw that one point. And so we're like, well, give him a little bit of grace, But they didn't see all of the things that we saw. But what if we could? What if we could see the cashier who snaps at you? What if we could see what happened in their day or their week or what's going on in their life? What about the person that cut you off in traffic? What if we could know what just happened in their life? What about the person on the bus that maybe is playing their music too loud or being disruptive in something they're doing? What if we could hear and know what's going on in their life? In other words, what if we could put ourselves in their shoes and walk a mile in their shoes? Could we maybe be a little bit more understanding and sympathetic to someone who is having a hard day and maybe is mean, not because they're a mean person, but because of the circumstances. He says to mourn with those who mourn, rejoice with those who rejoice. But he says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, and do not be conceited. So, when we are associating with other people, one of the things that often happens in situations where people feel like you're being stuck up, you're proud, you got your nose up in the air, I'm too good for you. And so how can we communicate to somebody that I'm not too good for you? So there's someone who might not be dressed as nicely, might be shabby, might not even smell that great. How do we show them that they are valued to us? To go and talk to them, to be kind to them, to share with them what's going on with you, just to be able to ask them, how are you today? Could that be a way that we could help someone who might have a feeling of meanness by being kind to them? To not be conceited, to not be too good for someone else. In verse 17 he says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. This is one of the ways that we can respond to people, is do not repay evil for evil. So when someone does something mean to you, our natural response is to do something mean back. Somebody makes a snide remark, well, we give them our snide remark right back. That's the evil for evil spirit. So when somebody says or does something that is mean, we can be mean right back. But he says, do not repay evil for evil. Instead, repay evil with good. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute too. It says in verse 18, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And here's the very trick of this to me. As long as it depends on you. As long as it depends on you, be at peace with other people. There are people that no matter what you do or say, they're going to be mean to you. They're not going to be nice. But as long as it is possible, as long as it is up to you, keep peace. Be nice. Instead of responding with anger when someone's angry at you. Whenever somebody is upset and frustrated, instead of responding in the like mind, respond with kindness. And see what happens with that. In verse 19 he says, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So there's a story in the Old Testament, a heroine, that most of us probably aren't aware of. Her name is Abigail. By mentioning her name, probably most of us wouldn't think of her or even know her story. But you might know one of the leading characters. His name is David. Now, David was on the outs with Saul, I mean. Saul was the king in that day. And Saul was persecuting David because he found out that a prophet had gone and made him the next king, had anointed him to be the following king to Saul. Not Saul and not his sons, but someone else outside of the chain. And Saul was upset. And because of this, he was out to get David. And he wanted to get rid of him, to kill him. And so David and his men, which I've heard 400 to 600 men that he had with him. And as they were traveling and trying to stay out of the way of Saul, of course, he's not able to work, he's not able to farm or shepherd or anything. He's on the run. So he's depending on other people. So he comes into this area and he kind of settles in this area for a while. And while he was there, one of the men that had shepherd in this area had his flocks. And Nabal is his name. He was letting his flocks go around, and David and his men never touched a one of them. Never harmed him, never gave him any hardship or anything. But actually, in turn, protected him and kept a watch out on him. So along comes the day when they butcher and they shear the sheep, and they are tending their crops, probably getting ready for winter or whatever. And David says, let's send a message to Nabal and just ask him if he would make a donation to us to allow us to have some food for our men. So he sends a message to Nabal, and he says, has his messengers go and tell him, when your men were with us, we never harmed them. We never did them any damage. We never gave them any hard time at all. We even protected them. And ask him, would you be willing to give us something in return? And I thought that was a pretty nice way of saying it. Will you give me back? By the way, this story is found in 1 Samuel, I believe chapter 26. But you can feel this heartfelt request from someone. But Nabal is not a nice man. As a matter of fact, his name means heavy, mean. And so this mean man replies back, "Who are you, David, son of Jesse?" He knew who he was. He says, "Who are you to ask me for something? You're on the outs with Saul. Why should I do anything for you? You're not even our king." And so he sends back this mean response to David. So, just to get this, David made a good effort to have a friendship with someone. In response, Nabal returned evil for good. So now David has an opportunity, because Nabal responded with evil. And what's his response going to be? Well, David is livid that this man isn't even kind to him. He's mean to him and criticizing him and calling him names. And so he says, "Fine, strap your swords on, boys, we're going to town." And so they strap on their swords and they head out to go confront Nabal. Now, Nabal would have been a shepherd, had some protection around him, a few men that were trained, but they couldn't withstand 400 to 600 men coming at him. So what does he do? Well, meanwhile, his wife's servant comes to him, and she says, "While you were gone, David's men came and asked for some food. And your husband, he sent back a reply, and he was mean to him. And he denied them their request." And she said, "I feel something bad coming." So the wife immediately lines up her donkeys and has them filled up with food of all kinds. And she goes out and she comes to David. And her response was, she fell down on the ground and she said, "My Lord, please forgive us. I was not there when you came, when your men came. I did not hear, or I would have done something at the time. But she said, now I come before you, asking you to bring peace to the situation." And she offers them the food. Now, when you look at the story and you hear the whole thing, you see something a little bit different. So I'm going to turn there to Samuel chapter 25. 1 Samuel chapter 25. And I want to read to you how she responds to David. And I want you to consider this. Good was done and evil was a response. Evil was done And David plans to do evil in return. In response to David's intended evil, watch what Abigail does. In verse 18, Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, and 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on the donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all of my watching over this fellow's property in the desert, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "My lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent." I'm going to pause there for just a minute. David, we often associate with the David that was herding the sheep, or the David that fought the Goliath, or maybe the David who was a friend of Jonathan. And we see a gentle, kind man. But at this very point, he is a fighting man, and he is one that is out for vengeance. So he is, in essence, going with an evil intent to kill every man under Nabal and leave no one to take care of those sheep. And his wife comes to him and begs for it. In verse 26, "Now since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives and you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal." We used to go to this homeschool conference. And this homeschool conference, there was the guy that was kind of over it all. He would try to get everybody to come back and sit down. And he always said the same phrase every time. He would say, "Thank you all for coming and sitting down quickly and quietly." Nobody was sitting down and nobody was moving quickly or quietly. But that was his way of saying, "Could you please do this? Thank you for doing this." That's what she's doing here. She's coming before David, knowing what his intent is. His intent is to get even. His intent is to return evil for evil. But she goes to him and she says, "I am glad that you have not done any bloodshed. I am glad that you are going to preserve the life of my family." And in verse 27, "And let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles," talking of David here. "Let no wrongdoing be found in you, as long as you live." Again, she's prompting here. She's saying, let nothing bad come to you. And by the way, may you not do anything wrong either. "Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live, even though someone is pursuing you to take your life. The life of my master will be found securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God." She's speaking again of David here. And she's saying, may you be safe and secure. May God protect you. May he tuck you into his pocket and keep you safe. May he keep you from any harm. These blessings that she's calling upon him The very man that was just coming to kill and destroy her family. And she goes on. But the lies of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. Sound familiar? When David took the rocks out of his sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant. So, David asked kindly. The response was evil. Decides to return evil for evil. And then, in place of evil, someone does good. And it softens his heart. And he realizes what he is about to do. And he realizes that this would be murder. Now I want you to think for a moment. You might think to yourself, this story doesn't really apply to me. But I want you to think about how often we get upset about something and we feel like vengeance is mine. I'm going to make this right. I'm going to fix this. One of the things that she does is she points out that vengeance is the Lord's. He will protect. He is the one that is over all things. Even when you're facing a giant with just a sling, God's in control. And she's reminding him that don't try to do it yourself. Don't return evil for evil, but return good for evil. The rest of the story is that Abigail goes back to her husband, and he is drinking and partying and having a good time. So the next morning, after he is sobered up, she goes to him and she says, I want you to know what I did. I went and I took a bunch of food out, and I met David as he was coming with his 400 men to destroy you. And I begged him to save your life. Amen. And Nabal was so shook up by that he went into a trance. And he never woke up from that trance. He died 10 days later. Makes you wonder if God had anything to do with that, huh? But a few days later, David finds out about it, and he sends word to her by messenger. Sorry to hear about the death of your husband. Would you like to be my wife? So she becomes his wife. But can we plan these things? Can we make these things come out the way we want them to? God is in control, and when we do things His way, He will bless us. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 41, it says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile with him, go with him 2. Whenever the Jews were called upon by the Romans to carry their load for a mile, they would come upon a farmer in the field and they'd drop their load and they'd say, come here, Jew, carry my burden for me. And so, by law, they were required to drop whatever they were doing, come and carry this load for the Roman soldier or whoever. And so they would come and carry their load for a mile. And as soon as they knew the mile was up, which I have a feeling they had it pretty measured out, they knew exactly where that mile was, because this isn't the first time it happened. So they come to the mile, but they keep going. And the Roman soldier thinking to himself, he must not know where that mile is. 1.5 miles, 1 3/4 miles, 2 miles comes up. What difference did that make to that Roman soldier? I don't know. I'm not sure. But for the Jew then to turn to him and say, here's your pack, have a nice day. What would that do to someone who is intending something that was kind of mean, kind of unfair, but instead to return good for evil? What impact would that make? If nothing else, it made an impact on his heart, and it changed his attitude towards the soldier. As we look at different stories throughout the Bible, there's many things that came to my mind. Like, for instance, Abimelech and Isaac. As Isaac is in the wilderness and he is taking care of his sheep, he comes to a well that his father had dug, and he even knows the name of the well that he had dug, and so he draws water out of it. But Abimelech is jealous, so he goes and sends his men out there, and they fill the well in so that he can't use the water. So he goes to another well, and he keeps doing this, and every well he comes to, Abimelech's men come and fill it in, until finally he gets to a place where he's far enough away from Abimelech that Abimelech doesn't care anymore. And how would that make you feel towards Abimelech? I would have a little bit of hurt feelings about that. But kind of the funny thing is a while later, his men, his herds had grown to the point where Abimelech comes to him and he says, I know we've had our differences, but would you sign an agreement with me to be my friend? Now, I don't know about you, but I probably would have been a little hesitant to sign that paper because this guy's not been nice to me. But Isaac does sign that, and he agrees to be the friend of Abimelech, returning good for evil. And their relationship was good. When I was working under a boss who I would have considered to have been mean, he came to me one day and in front of coworkers yelled at me and even cursed at me for something that I didn't do. As a matter of fact, he had asked me to watch over 2 other employees and said, will you manage them? And I said, I'll do my best. But I have no recourse. I'm not. I don't have any power to fire them. I can't threaten them. I can't really do anything. But I'll do my best. So he comes to me after they didn't either one show up for work one day and do their job. He comes and yells at me, and I felt pretty upset about that. So I called Darren up and I said, Darren, I need to go for a walk. So Darren went and talked to me, and we went for about 1.5 mile walk, and came back, and I had settled down a little bit, and I didn't respond to it. I didn't react like I wanted to, but instead just went ahead and did my job without saying anything. 2 days later, and I have no idea if this was related or not, but 2 days later, a guy comes to me and he says, I want you to come to work for me. And he told me what the job was, and I said, I have no idea how to do that job. And he says, I'll train you how to do the job, but I need somebody with your character, somebody with your work habits. And I can't help but think that that had something to do with the way that I had responded to that. And of course, the way Darren had talked me down. But you see what I'm saying, though, is when we return good for evil, we can make a difference. When we look at mean people and we see that maybe there's something going on in their life, maybe there's something that they need, maybe they're angry and bitter because of something that happened years ago. Maybe it's because of something that someone that I know did something to them. I don't really know what it would be. But could we be kind even when somebody is evil? Can we return good for evil and see what kind of a response that gives? We may never know. We may never see the difference. But usually you can see an immediate response when you do that. I would like to challenge you to think about these things and to consider, would you rather respond in kind to someone who is angry, or would you rather respond like Jesus would, with love and compassion and understanding? To try to see where they're at and see and understand the heartache that they may be dealing with.